The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with even 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddhist truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Anyway, nice to see everyone. I had everyone hopefully read the article I had written on suffering, and I remember talking and doing a Christian Buddhist theology class I was invited to talk to, and the Christians at the class, which was most of the students, all said they had a great trouble talking about suffering and how to deal with suffering. And these were all usually ministers and people who were working kind of in Christian, ministry type and helping professions. And the Buddhist monk who was there, one many of us knew, Venerable Keido, said, "There's nothing Buddhists like to talk about more than suffering." And somebody once said, "I give a lot of talks on suffering, but they're cheerful." But the most basic teaching in Buddhism, it's like I have a quote in an article, I think you're going to read it tomorrow, but where it says, all the Buddha taught is how to free yourself from suffering. Ends up the Buddha never said that, but the essence of his teaching was the Four Noble Truths, and he more or less taught that. It's not a quote that he actually said. And the Four Noble Truths are suffering exists. Often people translate it like life is suffering. No. When I ate that chocolate chip cookie yesterday, I was not suffering. But we can't avoid suffering. And I might be suffering today because I don't have another chocolate chip cookie. And kitchen, don't take that seriously. But the second noble truth is basically we're suffering because of our desires and attachments, that we want this and not that. We're not accepting just what we're given. We, are demanding something else. And the third noble truth is the fact that in the end, nothing is really suffering. Nirvana exists. And when we're suffering in Buddhism, it's like you're looking with the eye that is seeing things through desire, through the conditions that we want and don't want. And in Buddhism, when we see with the other eye, we see all is one. And there's nothing from the first, and there never was a problem. And our hearts are full no matter what the conditions are. And the fourth noble truth is that we should follow the Eightfold Path. Is a way, is Buddhist training. And it starts with right view, which means unless we're looking in the right direction, nothing will work anyway. If you go the wrong way, it doesn't work. If you go to the way of increasing your attachments, feeding your desires, you'll keep suffering more. And I came to Buddhism feeling really, basically feeling that I was suffering to some extent. Life didn't seem to be giving me what I wanted. I wasn't, nothing intense, just something there was an emptiness. I wasn't getting what I wanted really. And I remember when I first mentioned I wanted to be a monk, the person asking me said, "Okay, well, why do you want to do it?" And I kind of go, "I don't know what else to do." And he kind of said, I want sort of like, I could use something more than that. And I just said, that's it. I don't have something more. That seemed to be the only thing that was going to address that question. Well, I knew if I just pursued, kind of getting stuff, becoming something, because I was 24, I hadn't really set up a life yet, a career or what I'm going to do with my life. which is one of those difficult questions when you're 24. Just like when a young person comes here, often they kind of think, maybe, is that something I should do? Be a monk. Because, often if you're young enough, you don't even know what you're going to do with your life. But the arising of suffering meant, you have to look and start seeing how that second noble truth applies. And what am I doing that's making the suffering? Instead of thinking, I don't want this to be happening. This situation is making me suffer. This difficult person is making me suffer. This health problem, this emotion, the fact that, is making me suffer. And what are we telling ourselves that we need? The world is full of people who are saying, I don't want this karma. I don't want to be where I am. And, and that just doesn't work. Often they keep saying it, and sometimes when I'm talking to somebody, it's just like this heartfelt, deep, I don't want this. And of course, usually it's things nobody would want. But that's part of life. And how do we actually deal with it in a way where we just don't keep suffering and telling ourselves, I don't want this. And in the same way, people are often telling themselves the same basic story. I will be happier if I have this career, this person, this situation, this inner feeling. Like, if I was enlightened, I'd be happy. If I had this, I would be happy. And often they don't get it. Just like I was looking through my notes on things I've talked about like this, and it's a nice quote from the actor Patrick Swayze, where he said, the very worst thing that can happen to you is getting what you want. And you kind of go, because he got what he wanted, he became a movie star, and for him it wasn't at all a good thing. And when he died of cancer a while back, but I looked on when he died at what he had been doing, and he had moved into the desert of California, living on a ranch, kind of away from all the glitz and glamour of being a celebrity. And he would do his acting jobs, but then the rest of the time he just lived in the, in the rural area, and wasn't a movie star. And just like that, I remember listening to an interview very nicely of Bruce Springsteen on Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and he kind of goes, I wish I could be Bruce Springsteen, because most of the time he's just this ordinary guy who has a problem with depression, and he's not a rock, you're at home doing your normal stuff, and you're not a rock star. He says, it feels really good to perform, but you can't keep performing. You can't keep, and life on the road actually isn't good either. And so in a way, we have to kind of take to heart the teaching, like what's making us suffer, and and start seeing the ways we do it, and just like the expressions, what are we filling ourselves with? We're often, like I wrote in the article, seething with rage, burning with lust, being filled with themselves. Just the way that we can respond to the world, being consumed, being consumed with worry, that very word, being consumed with. And one of the reasons we meditate is we're trying to recognize we don't have to fill ourselves. And one of the things you get when you meditate often is you see what you're filling yourselves. And we learn not to be doing that. And that's why meditation, and we're trying to do this again in daily life, is you see what you're thinking and feeling, but you're trying to just keep coming back to just being present, letting it go, just dealing with it, but not making something out of it. And because fear is often in our life because we have to face impermanence. That even when we enjoy something, the obvious impermanence, that chocolate chip cookie didn't last very long. I even remember my father telling me when he grew up very poor, and he used to be amazed that little kids would just get a candy bar and eat the whole thing in a moment. Because he didn't get much candy, he would try to make it last as long as he could, savoring every little bit of the chocolate bar. And but either way, all our joy doesn't really last that long. And once we start seeing, having right view, which is seeing, which is the first step on the Eightfold Path, is seeing what is causing our suffering. How do we solve it? What's the real medicine? What's the real cure? Because as long as we think more is the cure, just like I remember seeing a great ad for a credit card, it was take the waiting out of wanting. And that kind of applies, and that applies to a lot of things and, of what we think will make us happy, and the way people will keep consuming more and more stuff. Kind of buying more and more collecting stuff, buying stuff, having stuff, thinking this will make you happy. When actually, it doesn't work. You keep buying it and it keeps becoming trivial. You buy a new car and after a while it's just a car. In fact, it becomes an old car surprisingly quick. And Ajahn Chah had a thing that I always like using. When we are suffering, we're not suffering from difficult conditions, we are suffering due to wrong view. Now that's actually a teaching that's, I know I've spoken to people who've practiced, monks a long time, they have trouble with that teaching because we want to make that, we're not making the suffering. These conditions must be making us suffer. And it's one of the reasons you have that article on someone in a concentration camp. Because if that didn't make you suffer, really what does make you suffer? And, if we look at something correctly, we realize, it's not really making us suffer. Pain doesn't make us suffer. It's your attitude, it's how you approach the pain that makes you suffer. When something goes wrong, it doesn't make us suffer, it's what we do with it. And if you view it as actually something that is part of your spiritual training. I can remember kind of jokingly saying when something would go wrong when I was a young monk here, we'd smile and kind of grimace and simultaneously and say, this is good training. That we have to deal with something going wrong. Or another monk had a saying I always like using. He says, this is something else in the rich tapestry of life. But we have a choice in when we're suffering. Wrong view has us blaming others, blaming ourselves, blaming that these conditions shouldn't be happening when they are what's happening. It's like what you're really saying often is, I don't want reality. I want a different reality in which this isn't happening. And it's like, or the question which people will frequently have is, why is this happening to me? It's like, why does anything happen? It would be like, why is there a tornado? Why? Someone here lived through the Paradise Fire, and it's, you kind of go, all those people, why did this happen? But it it's a forest fire, it happens, it's hard to argue with a natural disaster. But people doing wrong is as natural as a forest fire. It's as human as any condition, as human as a cat killing a mouse. It's been happening since the dawn of time. And yes, we have choices not to do it, but doing it is also a very natural thing, just like some cats don't go after mice. They're perfectly content, at least if you give them kibble. And they don't want to eat the mice. But whatever's happening is the karma, is the conditions you're being given, just like the weather. People are conditions like everything else. And we think, but they should know better. But of course we're in a world where we know not everyone knows better. I mean, it's like somebody, I remember saying, why is the world so unpeaceful? Why is there war? And I said to her, do you get along with your family? And she looked at me like that she probably didn't fully, like, or I said it a little broader, like, does everyone in your family get along? Because it's hard to get along. It's people are difficult. In fact, when I was young, one of the ideals that people often had in the 60s was a commune. Like, we can get rid of a lot of life better by living communally. The trouble is, people found it's really hard. It's hard enough putting up with the nuclear family. Putting up with a whole community of people is really difficult. And usually the only communities that really ended up lasting generally were the ones that had a spiritual contact, to kind of bring it into a bigger context of why you're putting up with all these annoying people. Even though at times they weren't, but at times it's hard, and most of them fell apart because it's hard to, it's hard to find harmony. You need a reason to do it. But with right view, we can, in the present moment, try to embrace what's there and realize, there is no suffering. Nothing, we just have to accept it. And the fact that we're having trouble doing it, well, that is the fact that we need to practice. There's nothing, that's training, Enlightenment is seeing that there's no problem. Training is trying to apply the teaching so we can see it. Because when we don't apply the teaching, then we're just losing ourselves in it. Just like getting upset with, why is that person this way? Like, it's, so it's, doing this. And, and somebody I remember not long ago asked me, how would I possibly know if I'm seeing things with right view? It's actually really easy to see if you're with right view. If you aren't seeing impermanence, you're not seeing with right view. If you don't see that it's really changeable and there's nothing, it's really solid there. It's just a feeling, a thought, someone's opinion. Somebody was saying, like, people will say, well, that really hurt my feelings. Okay, seeing what's right view, yes, they hurt your feelings, but see it with right view, you realize nothing's happening with hurt feelings. It's just like something hurt, it comes and goes. It's like saying something's wrong with the universe, that we stubbed our toe. It's just the nature of things, just like somebody hurting our feelings. And when you see with defilement, and that's what we're trying not to see through the eyes of desire, through the eyes of ill will and anger. And the fact that we're all seeing things through the eyes of ignorance and delusion, or we'd be enlightened right now. Okay, you're seeing with deluded eyes, but what do? The way you clear your eyes is by taking the Dharma to heart. So you're pointing yourself in the right direction of saying, it's not a problem that person is angry. It's not even a problem that I'm angry. I just have to stop following it. I have to catch it, and And if I made a mistake, I have to now deal with it and just learn from it and try not to make it in the future and clean up whatever the mess is that I made before. And when we view our life through these eyes of desire, these eyes of ill will, and these eyes of ignorance, we're ignoring the intuitive sense we have of a fundamental connection with others. We're actually getting lost in a self-centered, selfish point of view. And all you have to do is look at people who are having real trouble in life, and you'll see how much they're lost in kind of a self-centered point of view. And they're losing that sense of a connection with others that only comes from not getting lost in your desires and just being willing to see with the eyes of a Buddha, so you will see the heart of a Buddha. You know, and each time we act on delusion by getting lost in our desires, we keep adding to a self-centered being who's going to suffer. You know, not only suffer, but face a lot of suffering. They may enjoy some things, because people do. It's not like life can't have its pleasure and satisfaction and all the rest, but they'll have great difficulty with a lot of other aspects of life. You know, just like people will. And one of the things of training is, and the nice thing about practice is, you know, when things go wrong, you realize, God, are you grateful for your practice? You know, when people have a serious health problem, you know, the fact that they can find a place that's not so consumed with worry. Naturally, they're still worried, but they'll notice how frequently somebody will tell me, wow, they're surprised they're not consumed with worry. The worry's there, but there's also peace there. And that's a great gift. And what often stands against us doing something with the right view is often we have the fundamental doubt that it's possible for us to let go of our desires, transform, not to be bothered by something. I mean, I'll talk to people and they feel it's almost inconceivable that they won't, like, this has to upset me. It's a law of the universe, without looking at the way it is, and we'll have this fixed self that this is who I am, this is the way I look at it. I remember talking to someone who was having a problem stopping smoking, and they're telling me, I can't even conceive of a reality in which I don't smoke. You know, it's just inconceivable to me. And I said to them, okay, I know you're past that age, but just picture yourself being pregnant. Would you smoke? And she immediately said, of course not. You know, what she was really saying, I can't conceive of a reality in which me hurting myself is enough to make me stop smoking. But me hurting an unborn child, of course, I couldn't do that to my child. So when our motivation is clear enough and the suffering is clear enough, we'll actually do what's right. It's just in the case of somebody smoking, often they're not really willing to see fully what they're doing to themselves. You know, and usually when people get in doing it. And naturally some things can be overwhelming, you know, strong. Sometimes there's a thing, it's like there's a story or a message you liked using, which is, well, actually it was in a book she liked us reading, where back early in the 20th century, a famous Zen master comes and he's doing a tour of the United States, and in Chicago they take him to see the sights, and one of the sights, surprisingly, was a slaughterhouse. So they took him into the slaughterhouse, and as bad as slaughterhouses are now, 100 years ago, they were way, way worse. And he passed out. He just couldn't take it. And the person commenting on it said, there are places that monks do not need to go. You know, an active slaughterhouse, why deal with such intention? But if you go there, you have to see clearly. So you can see beyond birth and death. And you can realize in a way, that this is just birth and death and nothing fundamental is being damaged. But that's hard to do in the midst of such overwhelming suffering. And I like using this part that I had in the article on the concentration camp, and I actually have a few other similar accounts at the Priory of concentration camps, because they're a place probably where people treated each other about as bad as they could, because it was designed almost to be as bad as it could, which is rare. People usually don't put that much energy into into purposely making it as miserable as they can. But, concentration. And I have a number of accounts in the Priory of people who actually weren't being bound by the suffering. And part of it is right view, because when you look at it, the reason concentration camps and something like this are so overwhelming is the sense of the injustice and how bad it is that people are doing it to people. People face worse suffering than a concentration camp just due to normal karmic conditions. And I get an example that I know a lot of, that is an account, Lotus in the Fire, of a person who went through a bone marrow transplant. And when you read what he went through, it is amazingly difficult. I've actually purposely told people who are getting bone marrow transplants, don't read that book, because it makes it, it's not always as hard as his was, but the person did very good training with it. He was practicing at another Zen center, and got a lot out of it spiritually, and and you could see what the training is. But the main thing is he couldn't blame it. Everyone was trying to help him. It wasn't like there was anything going wrong. It was just the suffering that his body went through was horrific. Now you take a concentration camp, people weren't going through anything like that generally, but the inhumanity of it, that very word, inhumanity, when it should, actually, it's humanity. This is what humanity does at times. They do both good and bad, unfortunately, and all you have to do is look at history and just see, we had slavery, 150, 170 years ago or so in this country. And it's when you don't want to be there, like this is wrong, and it overwhelms you, and it's why everyone looks crushed in the concentration camp. And when the fellow goes, one went to Jeremy as towards a spring. One didn't ask oneself why. One didn't think about it. In the ocean of rage and suffering, there was this island, a man who didn't shout, who didn't ask no one for help, who was sufficient unto himself, a man who did not dream. This was more important than anything. The rest of us were dreamers. We were dreaming of women, men, of children, of houses, often of the very miseries of other times which we had, which we would call liberty. We weren't at Buchenwald. We didn't want anything to do with Buchenwald. And each time we came back, it was there just the same, and it hurt. And it's interesting, not dreaming. It's like I remember reading about a Zen master who put up in her meditation hall, abandon all hope, all ye who enter this hall. It's from Dante's Inferno, but the reason they're saying it is the purpose of training is actually to stop dreaming. You have to try to trust what you're being given now, because, and that actually the real gift is now, not, that you can find now. And Jeremy was not disappointed. Why would he have dreamed? When we saw him coming with immense serenity, we felt like shouting, "Close your eyes, what you see here burns." But the shout remained in our throat because from all evidence his eyes were solidly fixed on all our misery and did not blink. Even more, he did not seem like someone who took on a great burden upon himself, the air of a hero. He was not afraid. And that was just as natural as we were afraid. And then they quote, because this quote that's in the article is edited because it's a much longer passage. For one who knows how to see, things are just as they are. Now that's one of those lines that Buddhist teachers use all the time, that people often tell me it's annoying. But it's just the reality. Things are as they are. This is reality. This is what you have to deal with. To say you don't want what is, it's like saying, it's like living in the valley right now where it's 110 probably and saying, I want it 70. It is whatever it is. For one who knows how to see things, things are just always as they are. At first I did not understand. I felt something quite close to indignation. What? Book and wall like ordinary life impossible. I remember that I could not accept this. It had to be worse, and if not then, more beautiful, until finally Jeremy enabled me to see. It was not a revelation, a flashing discovery of the truth. I didn't even think there was an exchange of words. But one day it became obvious, palpable to me in the flesh, that Jeremy the welder had lent me his eyes. With these eyes I could see that Book and Wall was not unique, nor even privileged to be one of the places of the greatest human suffering. Jeremy taught me that with his eyes that Book and Wall was in each of us, baked and rebaked, tended incessantly, nurtured in horrible ways. But consequently we could vanquish it if you desired with enough force. He said that in ordinary life with good eyes, we would have seen the same horrors. But we had managed to be happy before. Well, the Nazis had given us a terrible microscope, the camp. This was not a reason to stop living. Jeremy was an example. He found joy in the midst of Barrack 57. He found it during moments of the day where we found only fear. And he found it in such great abundance that when we was present, we felt it rise up in us. Inexplicable sensation. Incredible even that there was joy. Joy was going to fill us. The joy of discovering that joy exists, that it is in each of us exactly as life is, without conditions, and which no condition, even the worst, can ever kill. And that's the fact that, we can find the Buddha in the midst of life and death. And nothing changes that reality. It's not like something gets in the way. It's there in your heart. And, and that's why we don't need to dream, because the dream is taking us away thinking this is what will make us happy. That is what makes us happy. And they're good things to have. It's not like, we don't want our life to be as good as it can be. It's not like Jeremy didn't want to get free all those people in the concentration camp, just like the one who wrote it, Jacques Lucien, was, in the resistance. But, we have to realize that, the real suffering comes from actually is all around us, in the sense that if you know what's going on in people, as people committing suicide, people suffering, people, I just gave, somebody who was having a problem with depression, a family member with depression, I gave this book by William Styrone, Lie Down in Darkness, where he talks about his depression, and it's amazing, how bad it can get. And, it's important to, and the real suffering, and you think, and once you stop blaming people, you realize these are just conditions, that people can act crazy is a human condition, and it's been happening all the time. I mean, as bad as the Nazis were, I don't know if they were any worse than the Khmer Rouge, you know what I mean? If you read what happened in Cambodia, it's horrible. Rwanda, all these other places, it's going on all the time. Just like when right now where people, are finding the war in the Ukraine overwhelming, that, wow, this is happening. And I kind of think to myself, there's worse stuff probably going on right now in the Sudan that most of us just ignore. It doesn't. I looked it up on the news. What actually is going on in the Sudan? They've been fighting a civil war for 10, 11 years there. They have child soldiers. They'll kill all the adults. They'll do all these horrible things. And unfortunately, this is the diluted side of the human condition. And just to kind of realize, we have to embrace both sides and just realize and try to help and do good, but you also have to realize this is just part of the deal. Just like if you have a child, you don't know what's, somebody will have a child, and they'll become schizophrenic. They'll have a child who, has a drug problem. They'll have a child who dies in an accident. They'll have a child who, messes up their life in various ways, and this is part of the human condition. And you just don't know. And it hurts, and that's part of the human. It's not like it's not supposed to hurt. But in a way, you can still be at peace with it and still find joy. Anyway. Homage to all the Buddhas, homage to all the Dharmas, homage to all the Sanghas.